Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video, kind of do a head-to-head comparison with the Oban Little Bay Single Malt Scotch Whisky and the Kilchoman Machir Bay Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky. So this is a bay versus a bay, sort of a battle of the bays. Now the reason why I chose these two whiskeys, besides their names, is we have an Islay peat. Kilchoman peats a certain percentage of their own barley. Oban does not. They do use some local barley, although probably not in this bottle. They do it in their 100% Islay bottling. This is a younger distillery. This is an older distillery. Both of them supposedly have both bourbon cask and sherry cask. The Oban Little Bay is a non-age statement. The barley was peated at 3 ppm. The spirit was aged in American hogsheads and ex-sherry cask, bottled at 43% alcohol by volume, and sells for about $80 in my neighborhood. The Kilchoman Machir Bay 6th edition, peated at 50 ppm, aged in ex-bourbon cask for about 90% and ex-sherry cask for 10%. It's bottled at 46% alcohol by volume and sells for $65 for the most recent release. So granted, this is an older bottling. I don't know what edition they have now. It's probably 9th or 10th edition. I don't know. Hopefully they have some consistency so that what I'm comparing here, if it were shown up on an exam, the more recent release, it would be comparable. But both ex-bourbon, both ex-sherry, only a few degrees, 3 degrees difference in terms of the ppm, one being at 43, the other being at 46, one being Islay, one being coastal mainland, highland. So there are some similarities and some dissimilarities. Now, the Kilchoman, according to online resources, peated at 50 ppm. The Oban, supposedly, I'm looking at a number of different resources. The Oban website doesn't tell you jack diddly, but a number of other resources say 3 ppm. Smelling and tasting this blind, I would think it was a lot higher than 3 ppm. It seems smokier, peatier than 3 ppm. Now, of course, in case you don't know, what the barley is peated at doesn't necessarily get totally reflected or end up in the actual whiskey. A lot of that smoke peat, a lot of the smoke from the peat sticks to the husk of the barley, and that husk doesn't stick with the barley throughout the rest of the process. So a lot of that gets lost just in the mash, but a lot of it is maintained. Then of course you have distillation, and then of course you have the cuts at the spirit bank. You're gonna lose a lot there, and if it has a lot of age, which these ones don't, you're going to lose some potentially over time, or it gets more integrated in the spirit. So to me, the Oban seems higher in ppm than what the online resources state. You can't trust everything you read on the internet, or from a whiskey tuber, including myself, or from books. One of the most irritating things is you read a book, 2 different books, well-respected authors, and their comments about a particular distillery or bottling or what else is different, or is contradictory to what they said on the website. So you have to kind of read around and figure out what's what. But I would just say straight up on the nose, it seems to have more to me than 3 ppm. If I were to estimate what it was, I don't know, 10, 15, but certainly more than 3 ppm. Now, the other thing a distiller can do, and we want more transparency and we want honesty. I wish, and very rarely, but every once in a while, I wish they would say, look, it started off at this ppm. That's what we peated the barley at. But we found that the end result is, after aging, was at this ppm. So for the sake of argument, say it started off at 50 ppm, bottled at 15 or 20 ppm, whatever. I wish they would do that. So it'd be more informative, more transparency. The generation of whiskey drinkers, particularly whiskey tubers and people watching like this, is far ahead of what whiskey drinkers were 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. We're not looking to just something to throw into cocktails and get drunk. The level of expectation and the level of knowledge that people have today because of the internet, because of books, because of the information that's available is much, much higher. And we want to know more about this whiskey, this thing we are so enthusiastic about. All right, let's move on. Now, color-wise, these are really, really, really different. The Oban has the coloration of a whiskey that spent some time in both bourbon and sherry cask. Of course, it probably has, E150 in it. It might have ABV in it. It has E150 in it. But from the color, if it's reflecting as it naturally would be, it's not so dark that it looks like 100% sherry cask or even 50-50. It has slight golden and copper color, even a slight orange character there. So if they only adjusted it so that there was a consistency and didn't go more than what would be naturally, then yeah, this looks like ex-bourbon cask and ex-sherry cask. Now supposedly, this Kilchoman 10% sherry cask, but look at the color on that. It's like the color of a Chardonnay wine, almost a Riesling. It has a very pale yellow. Based just on the color, I would not guess that it had any exposure to a sherry cask. On the nose, moderate, low to moderate intensity of peat. It's not a big expressive nose. Little orange citrus, perhaps a little peach, a little apple, a little pear. Just a minute amount of saltiness, perhaps a little lemon, hint of orange. These are all these are very subtle notes. There's nothing big popping out. Perhaps a little bit of like canned pear. The Kilchoman, the peat, boom. Particularly after sticking your nose in the Oban, by comparison, the peat just boom, pops up out of the glass. Very, very intense, very obvious. It's the first thing that comes to you. But the fruit character is more tropical. I get like pineapple, apple. I don't get anything that says to me sherry cask. Maybe a little bit of Meyer lemon pie. Some saltiness, salty sea breeze, a little like a salty, nutty character. A hint of ash. Now, because the Oban is going to be lower in peat, I'm going to start with the Oban, drink some water, and then get onto the Kilchoman. I'm going to do another one. Texture, let's talk about the structure. Kind of light, kind of watery. Doesn't have a whole lot of mouthfeel, so it doesn't like coat your mouth. Pretty much stays straight down the middle of the palate. Everything I said about the nose I'm getting on the palate, it's almost like a little bit of stone fruit going on there, a little bit of apple, a hint of dried orange. There's nothing that's real intense. Now, I've had this whiskey before, obviously, and I've reviewed it before. It's not coming across as peaty as I remember it. I talked about in a live stream on 10 reasons why you should do head-to-head comparison, and one of the comments I made in that video had to do with your memory. How well do you remember it? You can sort of taste whiskeys in your mind from memory, but every once in a while as memory fades, you kind of need to go back and recall what it tasted like. I remember this being smokier than before. However, I may have in my mind other Oban whiskeys because I have the 18 Distillers Edition. I may have in my mind, and I have the 14-year-old. I may have in my mind from memory a different Oban. This is their sort of bottom of the lowest level within their core range. So a better comparison might be actually taking the 14-year-old and going up against the Kilchoman. Finish is short. It's somewhat thin. Everything's sort of low to moderate. It's a nice whiskey, but nothing that makes you go, wow. The Kilchoman, it drinks a little bit of water. The Kilchoman, structure, it's heavier, weightier, thicker, more mouth coating. The smoke and the peat is straight up front. I mean, it's the first thing that really hits you. A little ashy on the finish with the smoke and the peat. Fruit character, it is more pineapple, maybe pear, maybe apple. Again, on the palate, I would never guess that it had any exposure whatsoever to any sherry cask. It definitely seems like a bourbon cask. Although it doesn't have as much vanilla as a lot of bourbon casks typically have. I do get a little bit of spice, but not as much as you would get from a sherry cask or even a first fill bourbon cask. It doesn't have. It's only 6 years old. It hasn't had enough time to interact with the cask, particularly in the climate of Islay, to really extract, I think, a lot of characteristics out of the cask that an older whiskey would. So it seems very young. Now, it seems young, but it doesn't have the new makey character. It doesn't seem like saccharine. It doesn't, those traits that I don't particularly care for. It doesn't have the melon character of a new make spirit. Now, Kilchoman relatively is a young distillery, particularly when this bottle came out. And so they were putting out bottles in order to bring in some cash. You can now get older Kilchomans than from when this was released. Now, which one do I prefer? Actually, in terms of the fruit character, I prefer the Oban Little Bay. In terms of the peat character, I like the Kilchoman. In terms of the mouth feel, I prefer the Kilchoman. In terms of the length of finish, I prefer the Kilchoman. What would I prefer if I was going to spend money on one over the other? The Kilchoman. I would go with the Kilchoman. I just think it has more kabang. And if you look at the prices, the Oban being $80 and the Kilchoman being $65. Of course, prices always vary depending on where you're at. And that's the price of the most recent one in my local area. I don't even know if you could find the 6th edition today. But bang for your buck, best value is going to be the most recent release of the Kilchoman. And the overall profile I would prefer, although in some ways the Oban Little Bay does have a few advantages. I think it does have more aroma and flavor notes, if you were to sort of count them up, than the Kilchoman. If you're a big peat fan, you're going to lean towards the Kilchoman. If you particularly prefer something a little bit more mouthfeel, you're going to lean towards the Kilchoman. If you're looking for something that has a little bit more nuance and aromas and flavors, you're probably going to head with the Little Bay. One thing I want to do before I wrap this up, I'm going to, just for giggles, I'm going to grab a bottle of the 14-year-old and do a quick comparison with that one. So I wasn't planning on this when I hit the record button, but I'll put the notes for the Kilchoman 14-year-old up there. You can read them for yourself since I don't have them readily handy. But let's see, on the bottle it says 43% alcohol by volume, but it's a 14-year-old. Color-wise, looks pretty much the same as the Little Bay. Nose, it's not that much different in terms of intensity of peat. Fruit character is very similar to the Little Bay. It's not a real big expressive whiskey, which is why I am now giving a slight angled turn, coat the glass. I am not one who likes to swear on my whiskey, but you do whatever the hell it is you want with your whiskey. You can tell, I mean, it's so obvious. the fruit notes are the same, but cranked up. It's not like huge, but it's cranked up. It's a more forward. It's a little more present. It's a little more known. It makes its presence known. The peat level is about the same, somewhat moderate. So I think moderate. So I think that 3 ppm may actually be accurate for both of these. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking the 18-year-old. I'm not going to grab the 18-year-old. Somehow, in my mind, I have a bigger presence of peat on my mind than what these are displaying. But anyhow, again, faulty memory. That's why I always want to retaste. So it's similar to the Oban Little Bay, but a little bit more oomph in terms of flavor. Not in terms of mouthfeel, not in terms of transition from front and middle into the finish or the length of finish. All that is pretty much the same. The main thing between the 14 and the Little Bay is the fruit character, particularly in the mid palate, is a little bit more present, which comes from age. All right, now between the 14 and the Kilchoman, which would I prefer? I like the fruit character of the 14-year-old more than I do the Kilchoman, but I like the kapow, the bang of the smoke character of the Kilchoman. All right, that's it for this video. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you've not yet subscribed, but you like watching my videos, we greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I go live or post a video. And if you've tried these either separately or together, let me know what you think down below. Until next time, Slanja. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.